wanted to take a minute to introduce myself. I am Pastor Nick Dallio, the lead pastor here at Proving Ground Church. I want to thank you for stopping by our channel and enjoying today's sermon. If this ministry has been a blessing to you, whether it's your first time watching or maybe you've been watching this church from afar for several years now, either way, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to partner with us. There are many different ways you can partner with us from afar. In the description of this video, you will see several links. Some of them will take you to our app. Some of them will take you to a page where you can partner with us through there. You can also send a check through the mail. Our address is 1 Proving Ground Road in Lakehurst, New Jersey. The zip is 08733. We couldn't do any of this ministry without your financial support. So I thank you in advance for partnering with us. Enjoy today's sermon.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nick. If you guys don't know me, I'm one of the elders here at Proving Ground Church, and I have the honor and privilege to bring you God's word today. I'd just like to open up in a word of prayer again. Dear Lord, just thank you for this opportunity just to speak today. Thank you for all the people that had the opportunity just to come to church today. I just ask that I be a vessel for your word, Lord, that it's not me that's speaking, it's you that's speaking through me. And I ask this in your name. Amen. So, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but I'm not a world-renowned Bible scholar. I don't have a bunch of degrees hanging up on a wall in an office somewhere. I'm just a guy who was called to serve in this capacity. To be completely honest, I was shocked when Pastor Nick asked me if I would consider sharing the word in front of the congregation. In the past, yes, I've led some smaller Bible studies for men, but nothing on this level. I was apprehensive, nervous, and to be honest, a little scared. However, after praying about this opportunity and really thinking about it, it became crystal clear to me. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. So the big topic I want to talk to you about surrounds the concept of standards and seeking perfection. Out in the world, as you already know, we are constantly bombarded by these terms and ideas. There are professional athletes, social media personalities, countless others telling you about their standards that they hold themselves to. So, for those who may not know also, I used to be a New Jersey State Trooper. So this is an organization that is steeped in tradition and maintaining certain standards because that is what you, the citizens, expect. So being that we are in Lakehurst, behind one of the largest military bases in the state, and knowing that we have individuals who have served or are currently serving in the military or law enforcement, I figured I'd share one quick story to highlight some of these standards. So as a recruit in the New Jersey State Police Academy, located in sunny Seagirt, New Jersey, and I'll get back to explaining why we call it sunny Seagirt. So as a recruit, you wear a tan khaki uniform, and you're expected to maintain an impeccable standard of dress. The uniform needs to be pressed, ironed with heavy starch. And for anyone that's going through anything like, with military in the future, I got some good tips for starch. So I used to make my own. I got it from a tip from a guy, old school product called Stay Flow, and I would literally mix it with water. 50-50 if you guys need it. It's 50% water, 50% Stay Flow. And I'm telling you, I would spray my uniform, iron it, and it would stand up like this in my closet. It was crazy. So in addition to the uniform being starched, the brass belt buckle shine like a mirror, your boots shine like a mirror as well. We'd wear a tie, was tucked into the shirt in a particular manner. Everything is scrutinized, down to the tiniest detail, because at the end of the day, when you're working on the street or on the road, the tiny details matter. Tiny details can separate life and death in critical situations. A couple of us even had nail clippers to remove loose strings or pieces of fabric on our uniform. That's how scrutinized we were. But anyway, one day while I was in formation marching to the chow hall, I caught the unwanted attention of one instructor. It was my day in the sunshine at this moment. Again, just to provide some context to people who never went to a police academy or military boot camp, you want to be blending in. You want to be what they call a gray man. You don't want to be that guy that's hanging out, drawn, getting on someone's radar. You want to be a little blip on the radar and get off. You don't want to be staying there in the sunshine, as we say. So anyway, this instructor pulled me out of formation and started grilling me, looking me up and down, trying to find anything out of place. Well, he found what he was looking for. A loose string, maybe 1 inch in length, was found hanging off one of my belt loops. He ripped it away and held it directly in my face. The disdain on this man's face was utter disgust. So I proceeded to do push-ups and other fun forms of calisthenics until my entire class went into the chow hall, and then I was allowed to proceed because of one string. It went against the standards, and I was remediated for it. And that's a funny word, remediated, while you're getting smoked. That's what they call it. It's just, yeah, I'm being remediated for this. Okay. So we have movies and entertainment discussing this idea of achieving perfection. And I just wanted to show you guys one clip from a famous movie for you guys to check out real quickly.
In every aspect of the game, you drop a pass, you run a mile. You miss a blocking assignment, you run a mile. You fumble the football, and I will break my foot off in your John Brown hind parts. And then you will run a mile. Perfection. Let's go to...
So just to provide some context, that's from an awesome movie, Remember the Titans. And Coach Boone, played by Denzel Washington, which is also based on a true story, by the way, he's highlighting to his team, he's a football coach at the time, what they're trying to achieve, perfection. And it's crazy, when you think of college sports or anything like that, they're always trying to seek perfection, especially in college football. Like if you want to go to the national championship, you have to be perfect. You have to have a perfect record. It's insane. So before being saved, I chased this idea of perfection as a young adult. I sought to be perfect in my schoolwork. I poured countless hours into my schoolwork, trying to get good grades. My dad always told me that if I got good grades, I'd get a good job, and I'd be able to make a lot of money. I hyper-focused on chasing this idea of being perfect, or as close to being perfect as possible for many years. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I never achieved perfection. How many others can relate to the chasing the idea of being perfect? Maybe it was in your illustrious high school or college sports careers. Maybe it's in your professional career. Maybe perfection is something you're still trying to achieve to this day. So, the passage we're going to be focusing on today is Matthew 5, verses 21 through 48, where Jesus highlights some of the most important standards as Christians we need to uphold. So I would like to take this opportunity just to welcome in our online family. The words will be up on the screen behind me, and for our online family, they will be on the bottom of your screen. So to provide some context of the situation of where we are at in this passage, this is the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus was seated on the hillside and taught the people in attendance the reality of God's kingdom for the citizens of the kingdom. In this passage, Jesus takes 6 Old Testament laws and illustrated what it means to have a righteousness that surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees. It is important to note that Jesus' teachings here do not overturn the existing Jewish law. Rather, Jesus presents what the Pharisees and lawmakers told the people and then clarify what God's true intent of the law was. So to break this passage down a little bit further, you will see 2 expressions throughout it. The statement saying, "You have heard that it was said," it's spoken 6 times. You will then hear the expression, "I say to you," which highlights Jesus' authority over the laws or standards written by the Pharisees. So the first standard we're going to talk about is anger or murder. So in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 22, it states, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." So the Pharisees taught that murder consists of taking someone's life. Jesus goes on here to explain, further clarify, and teach us that this commandment extends beyond the act of murder itself, but also the internal attitude behind the act. So of course, murder is wrong. Jesus is making it clear here that the anger that prompts the act of murder is also as wrong as the act. The anger that you have in your heart is just as sinful as the actual act of murder. When you really dive deep here and think about this passage, anger is such a foolish thing. It makes us destroyers rather than builders. It robs us of freedom and makes us prisoners. In 1 John 3:15 it states, to hate someone is to commit murder in our hearts. Sinful anger must be faced honestly and must be confessed to God as sin. I want to make something very clear. I'm going to be repeating this throughout the message, but in order to understand that, it's clear, we have to understand that Jesus' standards are not going to be attained by us. All right? These are standards that were designed by a perfect person. We are not perfect. Okay? So it's just something to keep, I'm going to keep reiterating that throughout the message, but I just want to bring it down, each time. The second one we're going to talk about is lust or adultery. So in Matthew 5, verse 27, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Adultery is defined as a consensual sexual relationship between a married person and someone who is not his or her spouse. So sexual impurity begins in the desires of the heart. To be clear, Jesus is not saying that lustful desires are equivalent to lustful deeds, and therefore a person might as well go ahead and commit adultery. That's not what he's saying. We need to really dive deep and think about the words here. In today's world, it is nearly impossible for a man to not fall into the trap of lust. I can't speak for women, but as a man, they use sexual attraction to buy and sell things, use things. It's impossible to not turn on the television, go on the internet, and not see some sort of sexual innuendo being used to get you to buy something, sell something, use this product. It's really just an attack on us all the time. But the big thing is there's a difference between the desire and deed because they're not identical. But spiritually speaking, they are equivalent. So to achieve victory here, we must purify the desires of the heart and discipline the actions of the body. So let me say that again because I really want something for you guys to really hit home on here. To achieve victory in overcoming and meeting the standard, not overcoming it, just meeting the standard, we must purify the desires of the heart and discipline the actions of the body. The next standard we're going to talk about might spark some people up. And I want to be clear, I'm not here to attack or judge or anything like that. But the next one we're going to talk about is divorce. So to talk about divorce, I want to provide some context here because it's huge to understand these things. There was a time and place that the Jewish leaders at the time were granting divorces for nearly anything, as ludicrous as a wife burning a meal. And I know, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but how many of us have made a bad meal, right? I have in almost my 11 years of marriage. Pastor Nick, I know, spoke about this a couple weeks ago in his own sermon about the meal prep, and it's a challenge, right? But I want to give you that context. That's what was going on at this time. It's ludicrous to think. So in Matthew 5, 31 through 32, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, make her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So again, going back to this concept of divorce and talking here, Jesus addresses this issue at various points throughout his ministry. We know that God hates divorce because there's so much collateral damage as a result. Now, coming from just the facts of life where we're at right now in the world, the general consensus is that half of all marriages end in divorce. Obviously, that percentage varies year over year, but overall, it's around that 50% mark. I want to be clear here also, in giving you more context, that divorces are granted for many reasons that are 100% valid. Some of them being abuse, abandonment, sexual immorality outside of your control. I know many couples today who are thriving in their second marriage or possibly even their third marriage. So please put this into context. This is not, again, to make you feel guilty or bad about divorce. I'm just speaking, what's going on in this passage. And again, to reiterate, please understand that Jesus' standards are not going to be attained by us. The next standard he's going to be talking about is swearing. And to be clear here, Jesus is not discussing or talking about cursing. What he's discussing is the use of oaths to affirm what is said is true. So in Matthew chapter 5, 33 through 34, again you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God. So the Pharisees at this time were using phrases and tricks to sidestep the truth, and utilizing oaths was one of their tools. How many times have you heard the phrases, I swear on my mother's grave, you join certain organizations or clubs and you have to take an oath for different things? Jesus taught that our conversation should be so honest and our character so true that we would not need crutches to get people to believe us. Words depend on character, and oaths cannot compensate for a poor character. The more words a man uses to try to convince us, the more suspicious we should be. Just think of like a real-world example real quickly. How many times have you gone looking to buy a car, and the salesman is trying to tell you up and down all the different great benefits of this car and just won't even let you get an word in edgewise? Doesn't that naturally make your antenna raise a little bit? So again, the more words a man uses to try to convince us, the more suspicious we should be. I want to be clear here too. I know I'm probably going a little quickly, but each of these standards that we're talking about here in this passage, you could spend an entire sermon on, each one. And it's been done. Nothing I'm going to say to you today has not been done before. I'm not rewriting the book or anything like that. So I just want to put that out there too, is that I'm going over these things pretty quickly, but I want you to know that obviously we can really dive deep into some of these different standards. The next one we're going to talk about is retaliation. So in verses 38 through 39, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. The original law was a fair one. It kept people from forcing the offender to pay a greater price than the offense deserved. It also prevented people from taking personal revenge. Jesus replaced the law with an attitude. Be willing to suffer loss yourself rather than cause another to suffer. So in order to turn the other cheek, we must stay where we're at and not run away. This demands both faith and love. When you really think about that, to take on that hurt and stuff, it demands the faith and love. It also means that we will be hurt, but it is better to be hurt on the outside than to be harmed on the inside. But it further means, and this is what I really want to emphasize, is that we should try to help the sinner. That's got to be hard, right? Am I the only one who feels like if I'm going to be hurt and then I have to help the sinner, pray for the sinner, and potentially help them in other ways too? I mean, that takes a lot. Psychologists tell us that violence is born of weakness, not strength. It is the strong man who can love and suffer hurt. It is the weak man who thinks only of himself and hurts others to protect himself. He hurts others, then runs away to protect himself. This next one is another tough one to talk about, this next standard, and it deals with loving your enemies. So in Matthew 5, 43 through 44, it states, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus defined our enemies as those who curse us, hate us, and exploit us selfishly. Anyone who's against us in heart or in action, meaning that they don't necessarily need to do the bad, they may just wish the bad. How many individuals can you think of that makes this standard nearly impossible to achieve? I'll be honest, I can think of a good handful. Since Christian love is an act of the will and not simply an emotion, he has the right to command us to love our enemies. After all, he loved us when we were his enemies, and that's from Romans 5, verse 10. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says that all people are my neighbors, and our neighbors include our enemies. Again, this means all people, not just the people on your street, in your small little community, all people. We may show this love by blessing those who curse us, doing good to them, and praying for them. Again, it comes back to the other standard. Doing good for them and praying for them, for someone that harms you or is your enemy, that's a hard standard to meet, but that's what Jesus is calling us to do. We may show this love by blessing those who curse us and praying for them. Again, I just want to reemphasize that. When we pray for our enemies, we find it easier to love them. It takes the poison out of our attitudes. Jesus gave 3 reasons for this. Number 1, this love is a mark of maturity, proving that we are sons of the Father and not just little children. Number 2, it is godlike. Number 3, it is a testimony to others. God expects us to live on a much higher plane than the lost people of the world who return good for good and evil for evil. As Christians, we must return good for an evil as an investment of love. So let me say that one more time because I really want that to set in. As Christians, we must return good for evil as an investment of love. The one thing, as I circle back here a little bit, is Matthew 5:48. And this is something, as I was preparing for this message, really stuck out to me, and obviously it's why I talked about perfection in the beginning. In Matthew 5, verse 48, it states, "You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." So again, as I was referencing in the beginning, Christ sets an unattainable standard. But the important thing to know is that though this standard is impossible to meet, God could not lower it without compromising his own perfection. He who was perfect could not set an imperfect standard of righteousness. So again, I'm going to repeat that. He who was perfect could not set an imperfect standard of righteousness. So let's circle back to that topic of perfection I was speaking about in the beginning. I used to go to a bigger church when I lived down in Virginia for a while. And the pastor, he would always go to this thing and say, at the very end of it, after going through this, the passages, he said, "So why is this all important? How does this apply to me, Nick? Thanks, Nick, for letting me, for showing me all these great standards that I can't achieve, nor will I ever be able to achieve." The reason why it's so important is because the marvelous truth of the gospel is that Christ has met this standard on our behalf. In 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21, "For our sake he made him to be sin, who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." Thinking you will never live up to these standards will keep people away from faith. But again, we were never meant to live up to these standards of Jesus. We are meant to follow Jesus. Again, we were never meant to live up to the standards of Jesus. We were meant to follow Jesus. This can honestly make people walk away from their faith because they feel that they can't live up to the standards of Jesus. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. You and I were not meant to live up to those standards. Let's talk about the world standards for a second. The world standards are easy. You can be at whatever you want to be, and the world standards will give you a thumbs up. Where has that gotten us? Look at what's going on in culture, society today. Even today, we're still dealing with issues by the Pharisees. They just have different titles in today's society. Maybe politicians, for instance. Before I close, how many people have had hardships or struggles in their life? I would hope that everyone raised their hand on that. Hardships are going to come. Struggles are going to be present. Life is going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. Good. Lean into that. Reframe that and be encouraged by this, because as long as we're in this struggle, we know that the Spirit of God is at work in your life, in my life. Again, we need to lean into this, all right? Again, I'd be worried if you weren't struggling, if you didn't raise your hand just there, with achieving any of these standards. Despite the overwhelming pressure poured out into each and every one of us by these worldly standards, we have a choice. We can choose the easy wrong or the hard right. I want to say that again. Choose the easy wrong or the hard right. As much as I'd like to take credit for this phrase, I need to credit where it's due. And this is a quote I heard about a year ago by an individual by the name of Nick Bear, who's a successful CEO, athlete, and more importantly, a follower of Jesus. No matter how successful, wealthy, good-looking, or perfect you may be, life is going to be hard. You do have a choice, though. You could choose the easy wrong or the hard right, meaning you could take the easy way out, given to the standards of this world. However, that may be an easy, less painful decision in the moment. I can guarantee you that it will be hard in the long run. Or you could choose the hard right. Choose to follow Jesus and these standards, knowing that you will never achieve them, which has got to be hard to really take in. I know it's hard for me, being a guy who was chasing perfection for so many years. These standards are for people who believe in Jesus. If you don't believe, you aren't going to care about any of these standards. But a person who by faith trusts in God enjoys his righteousness being reproduced in his life. I urge you all to overcome the desires of the flesh and choose to follow Jesus. I say this all as a reminder to not only you, but myself as well. I'm not perfect. I will never be perfect. But what I will do is I will choose to follow Jesus and do my absolute best to live up to these standards. Which standard will you choose to live your life by? The standards of the world or the standards illustrated by God?